of you, welcome me into talking to Rick earlier, welcome me into this, forum and giving me the opportunity to speak with all of you and kind of engage. For all transparency's sake, this is the first time that I'm giving this one. This is something that I've been wanting to do for a while and kind of get together because this is something I tend to work through quite a bit. So, as we go through the material, please feel free to chime in. We have the slides, but at the end of the day, the conversation and the discussion is going to be the more important factor here. Also, any feedback or anything as we're going through, and keep in mind, as we're going through, this is, Aaron's observations, kind of, working through different environments and things like that. No hard rules beyond this, but, getting into that discussion, I'd love to know, some of your guys' experiences as well with some of these topics and, some of the things that we'll be looking at today. So again, very much appreciate the time. Now, no further ado, jump in. So having just many pictures on this one. Already I had the introduction, so the only part, we met with a lot of you before. So, just some quick background. Being in DC here, I did start more of my consultancy career here in DC within the government space. Moved into commercial, have been able to help companies across industries, from insurance to retail to utilities, hardware manufacturing, et cetera, different types of work within that. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about is around those experiences and those different environments and, seeing different things and different adaptations that are necessary within some of that uniqueness, right? Before even getting into the consultancy world, I was part of startups. And all of those just, the mindset and the principles and the practices are the same, but how we apply and how we think through those concepts and adapt to those environments, that takes that understanding and working in partnership through it. So that's what we're going to be very much looking at today. I am part of C Prime. Let me actually go into presenter mode. We're in the right presenter mode, right? Okay. Perfect. So I'm part of C Prime. In short, we're a consultancy group that, as far as capabilities, help support all the capabilities that would be necessary as part of a transformation. So that would be from product to cloud, from data migrations to, of course, agile coaching, training, and support within different levels of experience within that. Now, what we're going to be talking about today is we're going to start off with drinking our own champagne. And then we're going to go through 5 observations that I have made. And like I said, would love to hear, your experiences and some observations you have made as well around how to think through, really building and staffing and pulling together an agile transformation, some of the considerations to make when you're putting that team together and how to keep that team connected kind of within that future and how to adapt to change over time. So with that being said, we're going to start off drinking our own champagne because one of my colleagues will not let me say eating our own dog food because she doesn't like the sound of that. So we will be drinking our own champagne or your choice of liquid. So, I was thinking around, the statement, right? And this very much comes from a place of, I heard it, Marcelo. Coming from a place of, how many transformations have I been a part of where I've seen us, go help, an organization or something along those lines and, to adapt the agile mindset and to think differently and, to leverage the principles. And then we go into it and we do it in waterfall, or we expect that this is going to work in a waterfall fashion. And it came down to this question of, have you ever seen an agile transformation in a Gantt chart? This rigid element. And I don't know if anyone has kind of seen that. This element of, okay, this is how it's going to work. And these are the hard rules and these are the hard blocks that we're going to have. and this is what's going to help us be agile. I'm seeing some nodding. I feel like others have experienced this before. I'll be honest, it really came to a head for me when one of my colleagues and we were working on something together. We were working on a proposal, and they looked at me and they go, "Why are you putting together a rigid roadmap for an agile transformation? Do you see what you're doing?" I was like, yeah, and it had me set back, and this was years ago, and it's still something that echoes in my head. And this idea of how often we forget about the agile principles, we forget about the things that we talk around with team dynamics. We forget those aspects when we, as coaches, as experts, as whatever the case may be, are really helping others adapt this. So, just to hit some of the kind of basics as we're going through, I know a lot of us have probably seen the Iron Triangle and that kind of agile adoption, right? Where traditional waterfall models is, we'll throw much money, we'll, throw the time, whatever the case, and usually that's not the case. But, and we have this fixed scope and we're going to drive this. And then agile flips that, right? Flips that idea of this plan-driven aspect and really looks at the value, right? What value are we able to deliver? What value can we actually drive? It doesn't mean it's all of it, but it allows us to right size and say what's important and what should we focus on. And that's what we encourage to others. But when we look at ourselves, can agile transformations fit the same concept? Can agile transformations be value driven as far as what we're actually trying to accomplish? So with that, and I know a lot of us have seen the Agile Manifesto, and I'll tee this up. How would you guys look at the Agile Manifesto within an Agile transformation? Do these concepts still apply? How would you think about applying, or how they could fit into the world of Agile transformations if you would?
So you're opening the mic for anyone to speak on these topics?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes, please. And we'll be doing this as we go. So please, anyone as we go through, feel free to chime in.
I find that in transformations, in my experience, we're doing these things, but we're doing the things on the left, but we're really making sure we're doing the things on the right. We're not like valuing them less over the ones on the left. And it just occurred to me, this presentation is great because it just occurred to me, like we're absolutely, working software being the transformation, the planning of the launch of the first art and things. But at the same time, we have ridiculous documentation and project plans and all of that stuff. So we're not quite finding that agile balance during the transformation. So it's very interesting to me.
You got it. And that's, Rick, please.
Oh, for me, the one that stands up is that customer collaboration. It's like who in the transformation is your customer, right? And making sure that there's a partnership there. That I think sometimes we forget. Sometimes it's more like, okay, we're doing the transformation and then somehow it doesn't go in the right way and you didn't communicate it properly. That change management concept and allowing people to learn and to kind of adapt to it, I think that's something we forget many times, right?
100%. Any others?
Well, I was thinking about the customer collaboration versus contract negotiation. If you're there as a consultant and you're there under a contract with this specific statement of work, you kind of have to walk a very fine line because there's what you're allowed to do based on what the contract says. So you can't always guide people where you'd really like them to go. You just have to try to get as close as you can without violating the contract.
Yeah. And there are methods of agile contracts and things like that, right? That can help. But it goes back to even that first slide. Sometimes we can't see the forest through the trees, right? I have seen and I'm not going to go too far on that, right? But like fixed contracts of we will do these things. Well, how do we learn? How do we adjust through this? How do we know that's the right thing at the right time?
Well, and if
Rick,
people are
I
just
really like
starting,
how, oh, I'm sorry, please. Yeah, sorry.
people are just starting the Agile journey, they're writing a contract based on what they think Agile is, but they probably don't really know. And you can probably only move them so far before they get frustrated if you just don't agree to the contract and move on.
Yeah, you got it. And that's,
we don't know anybody like that, do we, Rick?
No, of course not.
No, we don't know anybody like that.
Well, and I think, you're almost chasing a little the lead is one of the points I was thinking at the end, and right actually before we joined, it kind of hit my head is, at the end of the day, a lot of what we're going to be looking at, we talk about it, what's best from a value perspective, internal or external, whatever that case, but also the way we lead a transformation is an example to the organization of the mindset of how we're going to adopt those things, right? It's an example of how to do these actions.
So what I like to do with these Agile values is I like to also know the organizational values, right? And I like to do a little mapping with them. I like to say, okay, great, these are the Agile, how does your organizational values connect so that it can be real for them, right? They can kind of own it and feel like that's part, or there's a gap in their organizational values, right? And what's missing, what values can actually hurt, or conflict with what we're trying to do here. I think those are really good conversations. That sometimes it's more like, okay, you're not ready for it. Like we sometimes as coaches and enterprise coaches, it's just like, that we want to do well, but we're sometimes trapped. We're like, okay, they're not ready for this. How do we become courageous enough to say, there's a stop here until you get to this point. We really are not going to make the real impact. I had the other day, it's like, let's do Agile, but we only have 5% of the time or 10% of the time to do this stuff. And the teams can only be 10%. And it's just, they're starting already with these major impediments. Something to think about.
Yeah. It's funny, Rick, you brought something to mind. I had a client once tell me, and they were engineers. It was an engineering group, but we very much value process and tools. We very much, guys, but we do value process and tools. That's, we have to have that. And it's the way of thinking about it, right? And getting them to understand, hey, we're not doing away with those things. We're not saying now you're not going to be an engineer anymore. It's what are you doing it for, right? So it's that connection and it's that pull. And sometimes it is those hard conversations of, guys, you aren't ready, right, for this, right? Here's some of the things that you may want to think about to get to that place, to get to that foundational or basic kind of understanding. Rick, the other one I really like that you said, kind of jumping back before, that customer collaboration for contract negotiation, we're looking at it from a vendor perspective, and contractors, but also you can look at this from an internal perspective, right? Whoever, is your stakeholders within that transformation, they are your customers. And when we talk about contract negotiation, I don't know if anyone's ever been stuck in analysis paralysis before, where you spend 5 months and someone's always throwing that, oh, well, now how about this before we get started? And how about this? And do we consider this? And yes, we need to do the safe and guardrails, but if we never get started, if we just get stuck in that mode, we'll never understand what's going to work and what isn't going to work, right? And I really like how you were thinking around that one as well.
When you were saying that, it was also reminding of the failure and how difficult companies are to accept, well, what do you mean things aren't going to go well in the beginning? What do you mean we're going to experiment? Like those words are so scary for a lot of companies. And, responding to change, hey, we had a plan, but now we're going to be pivoting a lot. Like saying that to a company, we're going to be pivoting because we need to learn. And this is something new. I
Yeah,
don't know.
they think more like I like Marcelo. I like your background. I never lose, either I win or I learn. They don't understand that. There is definitely failure. They don't learn. They just fail.
Well, then you turn the acronym around on them, because what they don't understand is that fail itself is an acronym, the 4-letter word. Okay, it's frequent adventures in learning.
I love that.
So you flip the acronym on them.
Nice.
So, Rick, my question
Mhm.
is, when you brought up doing a comparison, sort of looking at their values against the values of the Agile Manifesto, when does that conversation happen? Is it during negotiation with a company when they bring you in, or when you're in the weeds, or when?
So
And who's it with?
I mean, Aaron could probably speak to that. The way I do it is we do assessments, right? We do like, are you ready for Agile? And then those are some of the probably foundational questions that you want to get, just to kind of have a better conversation behind it and see how prone they are to advance to the next step, right? It's that, are they embracing a growth mindset? So that's how I do it. And Aaron, however you guys work that out over there. The curious part about values, and it's always been a real strong statement for me, is that there's companies that feel that what comes first, value and behavior and culture, or the structure coming first? I've always had some interesting challenges trying to better communicate that. All right, I'm sorry I'm throwing some things at you. I don't know if this was like,
No, you're fine, and you guys are teeing this up. You guys are teeing this up very nicely. I'm just gonna say, so I'm gonna put a pin in it, because this is gonna be our presentation today. But this is the conversation, right? And a lot of actually where our focus is gonna be. And thank you guys for kind of sharing within that. That responding to change for following a plan. And we've talked about the challenge within that, right? Because if you're not there yet, they want to see a plan that has to be this rigid element. Okay, in 6 months, we're going to be in the transformation. One of the earlier transformations I was part of was within the federal agency, and I'm going to leave it as vague as I can, where essentially we were in an election year. And at the end of that election year, that CIO was going to be replaced, because that's how government agencies work. So they found this Agile thing, and they said, well, within this year, by the time I'm gone, we're going to be Agile. That was the mandate. Is that the understanding? Where is the purpose of why we're actually doing this versus you're not going to be here in a year? So I'm chasing the lead. We'll get more into that. And I think some of this came out in our last conversation. We have our Agile principles as well. Is there any that, and I think we can see some, the interaction, people working together. But there are any that stand out to really say, these are things that, we 100% need to keep in mind, within an Agile transformation, or these are things that are definitely apply. And on the flip side of that, do you see any challenges with applying some of the principles? And I know I have half of them here, I got half on the next slide. But any challenges with applying this principle within this kind of environment, because it is different than, software development or something along those lines?
I have one. I'm sorry, I'm stealing all the questions, guys. I apologize.
Rick, please. This is perfect.
Number two, I just thought of something. You know how sometimes this is welcoming change requirements even late in the development, right? Sometimes these executives, they'll shoot things in because they're tactical. I've seen a lot of tactical executives rather than really thinking strategically. And you'll see them, this week is this week, next week is something else, and it's not really allowing you to get the traction you need. So that was my first, thought of that. So I threw it out there.
Right. Rick, it's really, I'm going to jump, because actually I made the exact same connection, but I made it with 10. The simplicity that are maximizing the amount of work not done. And I was thinking, it's like, how does that apply to a transformation? But it's that, right? We could be doing things. We could be doing, 12 hours a day, coaching everything and everyone. But are we moving in the right direction? Are we actually doing the right things? Are we being reactionary versus proactive? To your point, that executive that, well, we want to do this tomorrow. Cool, but why? What is that actually going to help? Is that going to help push us in the right direction? It's that conversation, right? There's gonna be learning, there's gonna be things changing, but there's also that element of have 20 people working and see no change and see no real effective change, right? In a connected, in a enterprise perspective, right? Sorry, just like, yeah, love the connection there. Any others that people see it here? Let me see the culture.
Well, you're talking about working software.
Yeah. So the principles are talking about working software.
Right.
So do these things apply to something that isn't software, like the agile transformation?
Well, and that's a challenge when you're working with the business area, when they look at the principles and they say, well, these all relate to software, to IT. And they may have been burned by past attempts at agile transformations within IT. So sometimes I've had to just not say that it's agile. Just, why don't we try this?
Yeah. I've used that strategy too. Oh, we can't say agile. Okay, why don't we do things in a cadence? And maybe we should think about adapting. Sorry, Marcelo, I think you were going to chime in there.
No, I was just clearing my throat. Sorry.
I mean, the concepts, right, we're trying to get at really apply with 12. At regular intervals, reflect on how to become more effective and adjust your behavior. Like that sums it up, right? That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Yep. Satisfying the customer is the primary measure of progress. What?
Mm-hmm.
You got it. Now, Marcelo, and then I will move on because I want to make sure we can hit everything. But Marcelo, the question there is, how does that apply within the transformation where you're not always delivering this tangible work item?
The one simple answer that's worked in the past is, okay, how comfortable is the customer given that they don't have something tangible? If their comfort level is sufficient that they believe that you are doing your due diligence, you're good. If they don't, then the challenge is in helping them figure out what comfort level to them that you are doing your due diligence means. And by the way, that applies in government contracts right there, because those two words, due diligence, are incredibly powerful with that part of the force. Okay, because they don't get something until they get something usually, right? So satisfying the customer in those cases is how confident or how comfortable are you that you, as the person who's delivering to them, are doing your due diligence. And so long as you apply that as one of your guiding principles, okay, that you got the customer, you got them. They may not have the physical thing yet, but they've got that comfort that you are doing your due diligence.
Yeah.
So
your
mileage may vary.
And I love you brought up government. We can talk about this offline because this is a whole nother presentation. I love in government as we're going through things. Now, how do we apply and earn value to this? We don't. We can. But where those concepts actually blend and merge together. And it's all about how we're thinking about it. So thank you guys, for the conversation. I went through and I was thinking around this myself, and this is kind of some of the areas that I came as far as how we can apply these and how we can think about these pieces when we may not have some of these tangible areas, when we may not have some of these, clear-cut ways of actually applying things, just elements that we can think, and some of those teaming and team dynamic aspects of the considerations as we're actually going through. So we're going to talk about shared vision. We're going to start off matching skills to that vision, balancing the team, metrics, cadence, and synchronization, and getting that team to high performing. So, and this was the pin. So, you know, Rick, as you were kind of talking through it and sharing the question kind of you posed, you know, looking at this and looking at how we start to draw some of those connections. To me, all of this starts even earlier in why are you trying to do this? Why would you like to move in this direction? There are, you know, a lot of elements, and you know, there's burning platforms, there's being proactive leadership. But I've seen those instances, and I kind of gave an example before, you know, that environment where, hey, we're being agile. Why are we being agile? Because agile is good. That's why we want to be agile. Well, that's great, and that's fantastic. But what are we actually trying to affect? What is that proactivity or that issue that we're trying to accomplish? Why are we moving in this direction? Simon Sinek, and there's actually a link. I could probably drop it in the chat after. Great, I think it's about an 18-minute video where Simon Sinek kind of talks about this subject. You know, why we want to start with the why. And there's a quote here from it. I moved my camera to actually read it. Very few people or companies can clearly articulate the why they do what they do. By why, I mean your purpose, cause, or belief. Why does your company exist? Why do you get out of bed every morning? And why should anyone care? People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. Now, if I think of that in relation to a transformation, it's that same concept. We can be going through, and now my camera's down here, so my eyes are going weird. Now, you know, can be going through those steps. You know, Scaled Agile Framework has its, you know, the snake, right? There's different frameworks and implementation models, et cetera, et cetera. And we can be going through those aspects, but if we don't have the why, if the people, the organization doesn't have the why, it makes that anchorage more difficult. It makes that conversation, and, you know, I gave an example of engineers. If you go through a transformation with engineers and you don't have the why, they aren't going to go, because that is what engineers are there to do. They need the why. That is part of what is built into the way they work. And there's other kind of examples of that, right? So starting with the why and helping to identify that vision is important. Now, you know, I put a couple examples, and I'm not going to go in depth on these, of ways that we can kind of start calling that out, right? We can use things like the SWOT analysis. What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What are opportunities and threats that we consider in the consideration of what we're trying to accomplish here? There's also different exercises, so TOES, similar to SWOT, but essentially, if you're looking at those categories, you have, you know, those external opportunities, internal strengths. How can you, and the strengths, be used to exploit those opportunities? Or how can your opportunities be leveraged to overcome your weaknesses? I like the combination of these as we're kind of going through and just identifying opportunities or different effective areas that we can tackle, because this helps us get more action oriented.
I've always loved
the goal with this.
I've always loved the
sorry,
SWOT.
Rick.
I've always loved the SWOT. I just wish it was more transparent to everyone and people could see that living document and it'd be a conversation. Yeah. Hey, the reason why we're doing that is because we've got a weak thing here and we're trying to get this here. And then it makes sense to people, but it seems like it's hidden. It seems like it's a mystery. Like we talk to people all the time. Do you know why you're doing this? And they're fumbling and they don't have the same message being across. And this is a fair, and I'm not saying it's perfect, but it is a fair document to have more conversation about, right? So I think that was a good point for me.
And it's a technique, right? There's other techniques that help generate those conversations. It's just one of those tools that can help start thinking in that direction. But Rick, I agree. It is interesting as you're going through, and I'll say oftentimes in the early stages when you're going through this exercise, you may do it with a couple executives or a couple key leads within the transformation. But yeah, they're like, okay, and now we're going to keep it here. Now we don't want anyone to see because we said some, things that aren't good. about the organization.
Yeah.
It's difficult, right? That 100% is one of those elements that takes time to actually be transparent with the conversation. You know, even in retrospectives, I remember one organization had a leader pull me aside and they go, "We don't talk about things that are wrong. We don't do that here." I was like, okay, but we can, working with them, right? Well, we can do this. And they're like, but it isn't our culture, right? And this is something that's very difficult. And I really understood where they were coming from. It wasn't as much don't do this as understand where we are within our culture, and that frankly, this kind of conversation is not something we're used to. So it's that element. Now, another kind of tool here to think through is, one of those elements of that postcard to the future. And again, there's different models that you can kind of structure your vision on, but that postcard to the future of essentially saying, in the future, where I would like to get, this is that future state. If I'm writing that postcard to my future self, my future organization, this is where we would like to be. All of these things help create the anchorage, help really answer that why. Now, in the end of the day, the purpose of this, not just to have it, but, and Rick, I think this is to your point, that transparency is, this is a shared vision. This is what's important. Not just to have it with a couple key executives, but to have a shared vision across the organization. Something that actually unites, everyone from the people doing the work, the managers, et cetera, to this model of, this is why we actually want to do this. It's better for us doing the work. It's better for, the company and revenue, whatever the case may be. But this is why we're actually doing it, and that complete buy-in of that path forward. That quote here from the Lean Machine, fantastic book. I highly recommend it. It talks about, that vision is built. We do it in a silo. That's great that we have it, but we don't have that buy-in. A shared vision unifies the individual effort across an organization toward achieving a common goal. I think that's, a lot of the anchorage. And then building in some of the other elements, Sharon, to the question. Now that, okay, you've answered the why, now here, let's match up where some of the pain points are, some of the things that we can start addressing, some of the directional moves and connections in order to get to that next place. Sorry, guys, I talked with my hands way too much. It's a problem. I'm going to watch this later. I'm going to be like, oh, yeah, he did it again. So with that being said, we have our shared vision. That is our why. Now, if you looked at our three, the why, the how, the what, I'm going to jump to the what. The what is, okay, if this is where we want to be, what does that mean? What are outcomes? Not just outputs, but outcomes that we can measure and actually say, this is something that helps us understand that this is the direction, that we're moving in the right direction, that we are seeing that vision come to fruition. Again, this is part of that anchorage and something to really give back. And, I was going to say customer, and I mean that, both from customer as, if you're a vendor, but also customer if you're an internal person. Again, Rick, I really like how you're thinking about that. Whoever is leading your stakeholders, they're your customers, right? So these objectives, these outcomes can help you give something back to them to say, okay, you hold on to this. This is what you should be seeing effect. And if you don't, we need to have a conversation. We need to maybe make some adjustments. We're going to look actually more on that. So here's an example vision with an organization that I've worked with, and it's been sanitized and all of that. But if I'm looking at this vision and this organization, some of the things they were struggling with was they were a smaller organization. They had a product that was up and coming. They had no product kind of direction. It was very reactionary. as far as whatever the client asks, we're going to do it, and it's going to augment. And there's a lot of rework that goes into that. We really don't have that next stage of our product, what we're doing. Mind you, as far as the organization, we're a bunch of different groups that kind of came together in order to, be this organization that we are today, but we're all still working in our silos. We have no communication whatsoever. So we're looking at that vision that, they were looking at product management and R&D to provide high quality applications, regulatory compliance, and self-service configuration tools that provide value to our clients and revenue to our business. The agile transformation is a restructuring of the organizational mindset and work processes that support tools that will change the organizational culture and provide clarity, structure, sanity, and a common way of working, leading to providing highest value product improvements to our customer in the shortest lead time. Like our current state, we focus on the initiative of the following outcomes. So I'm going to hold the outcomes. We're actually going to talk more about that in the metrics. But if I'm looking at this, there's that orientation, right? These are specific areas that we want to see improvements in. These are specific, the why of why we're doing this. This was a conversation and something across a lot of different groups to pull this together. And frankly, coming to agreement that this was the vision took time. This wasn't an overnight thing, right? So looking at these examples, that's how we start looking at, okay, if this is where we want to be, how do we start getting there? That's where the how comes into play, and that partnership with the different aspects, as far as we have the why, we have the anchorage. Now, what are the steps that we can affect? What is that value that we can drive? And it's not all overnight either, right? There's change management aspects that come to this. There's crawl, walk, run. I actually said it right for once. I always mix up walk and crawl for some reason. But there's different models to actually leverage. That helps us start answering the how and then create adjustments as we're going. So, all right on time. So we have those elements. We have that connection. Okay. Sorry, I'm catching up in the chat really quick. If I'm going too fast or anything, please, guys, slow me down or. All right. So this slide here, and what we're going to talk about is matching skills to that measure, right sizing that skill set. For this slide, I actually sat down and off the top of my head, and didn't dig in anything, just off the top of my head, thought of every coaching role I could think of and put it down on the slide. Executive coach, strategy coach, enterprise coach, portfolio coach, program coach, team coach, product coach. What do we need? What is actually going to help us here? And first answering that question, what we're trying to accomplish, but this part, I feel like this starts getting into is that turn, right? Well, do we need this? And how many of this do we need? What do we bring in? How do we actually think through some of these elements? None of the above. I like that answer. Right. In the end of the day, it's about what we're trying to accomplish. And, I would say, and I know this probably is a minimalist way to look at it, there's three key areas that we can think of as part of a transformation. We're advising. We're the strategic advisors. This could be at the executive level. There's coaching elements in this. We're supporting. We're helping set more of the strategy and drive forward. We're doing. We are implementing. We're putting something into practice. We are executing upon this. Or we are upskilling. And this can be a combination. By upskilling, we are building specific skill sets. And this can be from development. This can be, the agile, mindset. We're helping upskill certain pieces. And there is a blending of these things. I'm not saying, transformation is going to be one or the other, but it's understanding what elements you may need in order to have that transformation, or even where you are within the transformation. Now, looking at our capabilities, what are we trying to implement? team specific, team of teams, product discovery, portfolio, to go on with this subject. There's different areas that we may be trying to affect. And it all goes back into our vision around, again, what are we actually saying that why is? Where are those effective areas? Where do we start in order to start getting some buy-in? Now, if we're looking at these skill sets, I know coaches who are fantastic strategy coaches. They're fantastic advisors, some of the best that I know. Portfolio management, other areas, they are superb. Now, because they have tuned themselves over time, they are actually, go ask them to work with a team, they're not really good at it. And it's not because they're not a good coach or anything else, it's where the expertise is. It's where that focus is. I know coaches that are able to focus on all of those areas, right? And play different roles within that. But it is kind of where that expertise may come into play, where we're really trying to affect that, what message really comes in. I think part of that also comes into some of that may be more tactical than other elements. Some of that may be more, hands-on than we're used to. If we're thinking of, going back to this slide, maybe, that upskilling element, I don't know if anyone's ever heard the term player coach before, where you're coaching and doing, right? And you're upskilling someone while you're coaching and you're demonstrating and executing with them and then backing off. And that takes a certain skill set. That takes a certain expertise, right? There's different elements and different capabilities that we can consider as we're thinking through how do we get started? What is that team? And what skills are we bringing into this? And then environment specific. There may be framework specificity that should be acknowledged, or this is more in an adaptive state. There may be tooling considerations that are going to help as that coach kind of gets into the culture, starts working with them. That may not be a factor to actually consider. There's focus of work. I mentioned before, I've worked within the software and hardware world. One thing that I consider very much within the hardware space is the adaptability within a coach of applying some of the practices and principles. Because within hardware, there may be some aspects of some of the considerations of actually adapting and applying the principles. Behind the actual why, it may not work the same way that we would expect within the software world, but we can still receive the benefits. It's about understanding how do we adapt to this type of work in this environment and still get those benefits and still get those aspects of essentially the overall why those certain things are being implemented. The government space versus commercial, all of these things, the maturity of the organization, these are all considerations when we're looking at where are some of the skills going to come into play within this transformation, within the vision that we spoke to. Any other constraints or other areas that you guys would consider when we're talking just around the skills specifically? All right.
Is there an element of culture? What kind of, it's different when you work in Manhattan versus Chicago. You kind of have to understand how to navigate the culture of a place too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah.
100%. 100%. So we have the vision, we have the why, we have our skills. Now looking at balancing the team. So working with clients, a lot of times as we start off, number one thing we want to see is we want the rock stars. We want that rock star mentality. We want the best of the best, and we want 20 of them. Fantastic. But looking at those, what does that mean? Well, they have all the experience. They have every skill that we need. They're going to work directly with the executives. You know, they're going to be independent thinkers. They're focused on driving. They're creating friction. And I'll be very clear. These points here, these are meant to be negatives. There is positive friction that can be created. That is actually something that can be helpful within the transformation. Some of the independence, the advisory, those things can be benefits. But another aspect to consider here is how do those people, how do those rock stars work with one another? How do those interactions actually come into play? I was debating. I will say, you know, this can work in different ways, and we'll get into it. One of the ones that comes to mind is I have worked in an environment where someone else's failure was your success. It is not an environment I ever want to work in again. I can assure you of that. But what is that? What are we really trying to, the behavior we're trying to drive and the team dynamics we're trying to drive as part of this? So with that being said, you know, one thing, and again, this is an example, this is something that I enjoy leveraging within those kind of team dynamics, is building team roles. So this is a framework. I could actually probably drop the website if anyone wanted to look into it. I am not an expert in this whatsoever. There are specific actual coaches and advisors that specifically look at these factors. The short of it from a novice, from someone who just more goes through it and leverages it than is that expertise is, you know, they really characterize different personality, different roles in 3 different ways. Thinking roles, the innovators, the specialists, the monitors, the observers and evaluators, that deep analysis. Action roles, shapers, people who are going to drive, who are going to push, the implementers, people who are going to put things into practice, and then those completer finishers, the ones who are going to make sure things are getting done. As well as our people roles, teamwork, the coordinators, resource investigator, ensuring that we have everything we need. Now, what Belbin does is it actually takes a self-perception assessment. I think if you've been through the Myers-Briggs or something like that, you're kind of familiar with those. They also do an observer one of your team, where it looks at the same kind of questions, but your team is now filling it out in respect to you. And then it takes that assessment and it combines and it says, here's where you observe yourself, here's where your team observes you in relation to these different roles. And it talks about different strengths. It talks about weaknesses. It talks, there's one I really like, a phrase there, it's called allowable weaknesses. Hey, guess what? Even on your own assessment, you said you're not very good at this. I'll be very transparent. My lowest, Jen's gonna love it, is completer finisher. That is my lowest. I am terrible at the completer finisher.
No comment.
Thank you. But it's true, and it helps me recognize it. So the reason I like this structure, and I think the concept of looking at these different areas that are necessary for a team to actually function, because you need someone to be the driver, you need someone to be the completer finisher, you need plans. But if everyone's trying to do that role, you're going to have more conflicts than you're actually going to have the success of the team. So an example, again, Jed, you're going to love this. There's a team of us in the East of leads who went through this expertise, that we went through this exercise, sorry. And what we found was 2 of us have the exact same one with shapers and plants, and we're both terrible completer finishers. And the other one had a balance. You don't know who, Jen, it's fine. The other one was more balanced. And we walked away, and the first thing the coach said that was helping us and advising us kind of through this assessment was, oh, you two, the two that are exactly the same, you fight all the time, don't you? Yeah, we do. Because we're both trying to drive. We're both trying to do the same thing within that team dynamic. One of the things I really like about this is, unlike Myers-Briggs or some of the other structures, I'm not saying don't use them or leverage kind of that, to kind of understand where people's strengths and weaknesses are and how to create that balance, is this is not locked in. This is about your role within the team. And just because you may not may not be the best, completer finisher, that doesn't mean you can't do that. That doesn't mean you can't change over time, and that can't be your strength. One of the things that we decided within that team dynamic was we're going to rotate that completer finisher. We're going to acknowledge that we're doing it, and we're going to encourage, that person to be that and drive, some of these initiatives forward. Because we'd have 20 initiatives, and then we'd be like, oh, great, who's going to go do it? Wonderful. No, great, good. So it's that discussion, less than trying to put people into a box and saying, this is what you're good at, more of how do we interact as a team. I recently talked to, an individual, and they were talking about some of the team dynamics, and they said, I had the whole team come up, and they were, really kind of upset about, this one kind of person that's, leading, and they're my best person. They're doing the best about anyone, but, it's really difficult. I don't know what to do. It's not about their specific expertise. It's about those interactions. It's about how that team is coming together in order to complete the shared vision. So could probably have done an hour and a half on this, because I very much enjoy this exercise. And like I said, I am not an expert in any way on this, but I think it's a good example of those team dynamics.
So Aaron, I love this tool.
Mm-hmm.
I used that a long time ago as well. I'm a plant, so I don't know if again, but I love the idea of two plants in one room is an interesting conversation, but it's good when you're trying to figure new ideas. But when you're in the implementation phase, two plants can drive people crazy because we're switching our minds, changing our minds, and you guys want to get things done. And it's an interesting conversation. Sometimes they even say, when you read some of that material, it's like, you have to have all those capabilities because they're going to come in handy. Sometimes you don't need to have them on the team, but you need to have access to it. You need to have access to it so that you really complement. The only hard thing for me to do that when I was using this tool is that the assessment of people grading you is really powerful. But when you're creating a new team, you might not have all that information, right? So they gotta know you to assess you, right? So it's an interesting exercise to do. I loved it. I thought that was actually the perfect way of seeing a high performing team, because you could see them kind of blend their skill sets. So pretty
100%, 100%, and it's a good point. Here, I'll hit it because Marcelo has his finger.
Yeah, no, I got something for Rick. When you have a new team, have and this is the reverse of something that I was telling somebody else of how I use this, which is when you have a new team, pick your three strongest, Aaron. Pick your three weakest. Tell the rest of the team why you think these are your strengths, your three strongest attributes, and tell your team why you think these are your three weakest. Get them talking to each other.
I think that's cool, but I've also found that sometimes you're surprised. You're like, oh, I'm the more this, and you get a lot of things that people tell you.
But the point is, you get them to tell each other why. What is it that led you to believe this about yourself? Tell me a little bit about how you arrived there. Okay. But a proviso to that is that I've likely set up a working agreement where everybody is safe to say what they need to say. There's no judgment at this point. In other words, it's a judgment. It's Las Vegas, everybody. We're in Vegas. And you know what happens in Vegas, right? It stays in Vegas. So there you go.
Shows up on YouTube.
Oh, sorry. Oh, good.
There you go. So somebody was going to say something
We
else.
can edit this part out, right? No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Yeah, we can edit it out in post.
But just to say, Rick, I think that is a fair point, right? This works when you have some of that knowledge, and I really like Marcelo's kind of tip, to kind of work through that too, because in the end of the day, it's more recognizing, and that's why, again, I kind of like this almost more than the Myers and some of the others, because it's more recognizing the need for some of these aspects within the team, and someone to take that on. Hey, I may not be the best completer finisher, but if that's the gap on the team, I need to take that on. And I also can recognize about myself that, guess what, I may have to put a little more effort into playing this role because it isn't natural to me, because it isn't that thing. This is, yeah, I very much enjoy it. And like I said, even within those interactions, it was just very, very interesting, and it does work. You have to be open and honest. That's the only way it works to really get it. So, our team dynamics. Another consideration here, and this is a balance, is an internal and external function. And when I say external, I do mean vendors. Now, the reason I wanted to put this in here, and the reason why I think this is important, is because I've seen both sides of this, right? Now, from an internal standpoint, you can bring in 20 vendors to an organization and expect that transformation, but without the organization investment, without that anchorage back into the culture, without that stickiness and that connectivity, it may not actually take hold. You may not have that same level of engagement because there is a certain level of investment that is necessary. You have to invest the time. You have to be part of this. Even if the vendors go away, you have to be able to carry that forward because, frankly, there's always optimizations. There's always something to go forward. It is important to have that internal factor. Now, where I have the external elements here is transformations change over time. Building a really large transformation team internally can actually have some challenges down the road because as that transformation takes hold, the roles may change. Things may be different. Now, I'm not saying people can't take on different roles and can't match those skills. I actually have a slide to kind of talk about it later. But that flexibility, I think, is valuable as well because I have seen organizations that went very heavily internally, and then they got to a certain place where they weren't in that full transformative mode, and people who didn't want to move on to other things actually had to leave the company because they no longer were able to fulfill that coaching role or that role was removed. And it was one of those elements. I actually knew someone that was like part of an organization for 20 odd years that role was removed and they moved on because transformation had just changed. Now there's ways to adapt around that. And the other elements here, that unbiased, that there are no politics from a vendor, that having someone that doesn't have some of that history, the best tips, things like that are going to be coming in, as well as that adaptability, those are going to be important factors to consider as well. So I do think there is a balance between those internal and external factors, being able to really adapt your transformation over time and be able to respond to that change. I think that very much helps. Another consideration here is our differing levels of maturity. Again, with that rock star, I want the 20 years of experience. That's great, but how are you balancing the team again? So bringing in more junior people, bringing in differing levels of maturity with that team can help do a couple different things, can help grow those individuals, can help create those anchorage. They can learn and grow within working in that team and learning from the other coaches and learning from that different expertise. Also can bring in new ideas. I come into things with certain ideas because I've been burned a half time. I've dealt with things over here. Like, you do create these calluses over time and these biases towards certain elements. Bringing in someone that may not have those helps you step back, helps you think about things. And there's been many times when, someone with not, same level of expertise has been like, hey, did we think of this? I'm like, no, I didn't. I went right over that. Like, that was not a consideration. it also allows for those roles to take place, right? It allows to take on some of the more implementing or more some of the doing roles, and then learning and building into more of the strategic ones by working and collaborating with the team over time. So overall, this section, I think it's the first bullet here. Think of the team dynamics, not just the individual contributors. All right. So I'm actually going to move through this one probably pretty quick. Any questions or comments? And I know I'm getting up against the clock here, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time this evening. All right. We talked about the metrics before. They help us anchor. They help create some more tangibility, to something that can feel intangible over time. There are examples, there's different ways we could look at this. The objectives and key results, I think, is very helpful. Jen and I and the team actually went through regional planning yesterday, and we leverage this. We do quarterly planning for our entire region across all of our accounts, and we say here, from a community aspect, from et cetera, here's our objectives, and here's some results actually from a business perspective to see if we're actually making gains. One of those is that we have more community forums for teams to feel more like teams and feel more connective. How do we actually see that? Net promoter scores, et cetera, that we have forums in place. There's different examples of outcomes, time to market, et cetera, that you can work with your client or an internal, transformation, reduction of waste over time, happier, more motivated employees, flow of work. And there's different leading indicators that can help too. Now, when I talk about a leading indicator and a lagging indicator, some of those key results or some of those outcomes may be years down the line as far as really seeing the fulfillment of those. But there's some elements as far as leading indicators to tell us that we are headed in the right direction, that, hey, I'm seeing some of these things take place. I'm seeing that needle start to move. I think a really easy one, hey, we're affecting an operations group, and implementing more agile concepts. And the goal here is to remove some of the lead time and waste. And one of those easy leading indicators would be, what is the time to close a ticket? Are we seeing that reduction? So there are things that can help us tell us that we're headed in that right direction. And then those lagging indicators, have we actually been able to accomplish this? So back to that vision that we shared before, what we see is we actually have those objectives and key results associated with the vision itself. Now, one thing that we can do with that is when we see those metrics, if you go back, these are not hard metrics whatsoever, up 50%, down 50%. It is swag. It is not, we are hitting 23.7%. But it helps us tell us what direction we want to move. Now we can build work, we can actually build a backlog of work and associate it, one, to say, okay, what are some of those leading indications? What are some of those factors? And it can help in the prioritization and help in the discussion of what are the things that we should really be focusing on. Now, cadence and synchronization, I will do it quick because I want to hit our last kind of section here. When we talk about cadence and synchronization, I do leverage, like I said, regional planning for the entire East Coast with accounts that may or not working with one another. I do this within large accounts and large transformations as well, even from an internal structure. We just did one with a 20+ coaching team that, a lot of the challenges, they had risks, they had blockers, some people, were blocked and weren't doing anything. And you had all these kind of pieces coming together and having those discussions and just high level kind of identifying the work, identifying dependencies, being able to say, hey, I haven't been able to, really push the needle. Here's a blocker. Can someone help me with this? Or can we make an adjustment? Those conversations were powerful. People were able to lead with that, we have our connective, vision, but also that connective strategy. And this is how we're coming together in order to achieve this. Main tip here, don't be rigid. Don't try to apply every single principle and have to walk out. Look at what you would like to accomplish with this and have some flexibility within that application. Leveraging demos and reviews as well, I think, are really powerful. This can be difficult as we're looking at, how do we actually leverage that? Artifacts, team metrics, different outputs. One thing as we're actually looking at this, and this is something to elicit that stakeholder feedback, is avoid some of those vanity metrics. We've trained 100 people in the organization. I've done that, style before. And in those trainings, people were saying, great, we're in training, but when am I actually going to be able to use this? So how do we actually see the results? How do we see the impacts in the teams? How do we bring that to attention? And then, of course, continually retrospect and identify those new opportunities. All right, getting to high performing. So I'm going to skip because I know I got 3 minutes, and I appreciate your guys' patience with me. I enjoyed the conversation. You need to get my cadence a little here. When we talk around high performing, we know the stages: forming, storming, norming, performing, getting to that state, right? It takes time, and it takes a team that's actually working with one another. Now, the difficulty here is transformations are meant to change over time. And when you look at that consistency, as transformations change, as transformations are successful, you may move into more of an operations mode. You may find that, some of the skills are not the same skills that are necessary at that point of the transformation. You may have coaches who are really great at being that strategic advisor and being that person and setting that stage and kind of doing that now in a sustainment mode, now in an operations, and they're getting fatigued and they're feeling some of that complacency. So it's difficult to get that high performing team because there is elements and flexibility necessary within that team coming together and within the transformation itself, the nature of a transformation. So some of the things to think about is, one, as we look at the Belbin, keep some of those responsibilities and roles dynamic. Have transition plans in place. As far as, I don't mean like heavy transition, I mean, how do we actually keep some of that consistency? If, we may be changing roles or, certain expectations, how do we do that in a constructive way? How do we leverage some of that cadence and some of those, milestones in order to say, okay, here's where we can start some of that transitioning or knowledge sharing? How do we balance all of this with that overall consistency? And now we're done. Here's my end advice for everyone. Beyond everything, build a team that can change together. Build a team that has that muscle memory, that enjoys working with one another, that is able to actually look at a transformation and work through the change and work through the struggles and work through the things and the experiments and pilots, and are able to be that connective unit to drive things forward to get to that ultimate vision. Now, 1 minute for questions. I apologize. Took us right to the end.
One person can ask a question. We can get
One person.
We're going to be able to take care of future questions, right? So anything you have that can't answer today, Aaron, I don't know if you realize, right? You cannot leave this group, right? I don't know if that you read the fine print, but that's a must. Okay, so maybe one question. One quick question, if anybody has one. I've got a ton of questions, but I don't want to take up everyone's time right now. I know everyone's, it's kind of late, but again, an amazing job. We really appreciate you sharing this. This was really, really like a hit home for what a lot of us do here. So I think that was really rewarding. And again, we want to make sure that you are here with us. So we'll get you back over here on all the other topics. And now this is your first recording. Now we can, let's see how the next one goes. But to me, I think you did a great job. You hit on all the right points. So I just wish this was longer, right? And maybe face to face so we could do activities is probably the only thing I would add to that, because I would love to have had some activities with them.